Thank you for coming to this session. Thank you for being early birds. We are very much looking forward to interacting with you. We would really like to make our session inclusive. We want to create a friendly atmosphere. We are not necessarily experts here to tell you that this is how you should do things. We are all here to share experiences, to share challenges, and to talk about the very important topic of empowering women, youth, and persons with disabilities to report corruption and blow the whistle. So I'd just like to ask, if you're sitting at the back, could you move to the front? Don't be afraid, don't hide, don't be shy. We really want to hear from everybody. So to start our discussion this morning, we are very happy to have Claudia Zanen. Did I introduce myself? I did not introduce myself. My name is Monica Kiria. I work at the UFO Anti-Corruption Resource Center. And one of the things that I work on is integrating a gender perspective in anti-corruption. And that's why I find this topic very important and having more inclusive anti-corruption policies. So Claudia Zanen is from GIZ, and she's going to tell us a little bit about why they took the initiative to apply for this panel. It was your initiative, thank you, and of course the UNODC as well. So we've been working together, but Claudia is the director of the UN Global Compact Network Germany, and she coordinates the alliance.
Just the anti-corruption part, not
just
the whole
anti-corruption
UN Global
part.
Compact Germany.
Okay. Oh, okay. So where did I get all this from then? Are you just trying to be modest? Don't be modest. There's no need for it. Anyway. She does a lot of important work, shall we just say that? And so, Claudia, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica, for this kind introduction. And I will unfortunately have to read my words because it's a little bit more official. So bear with me, and I'm looking very much forward to the discussion. Dear panelists, dear audience. First, I would like to thank Transparency International for their dedication, contributions to co-organize this event together with us, the sector program Anti-Corruption, and now I lost my words. Oh no. Worst case situation here.
Just speak from your heart. You know what you want to say.
No. That's not my heart. It's all of our.
Oh, it's the whole of GIZs. Okay, official. Let's get on with it then. Claudia, on behalf of the whole of GIZ, here we go.
Okay. So, first I would like to thank Transparency International for their dedication and contributions to co-organize this event together with us, the sector program Anti-Corruption and Integrity at GIZ, that works on behalf of the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ. A heartfelt thank you also to the panelists from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes, its youth-led Integrity Advisory Board, Transparency International Madagascar, as well as the German Institute for Compliance. And many thanks to U4 Anti-Corruption Resource Center for moderating today's panel on its highly important topic. We believe that the debate on how to empower women, youth, and people with disabilities through gender-sensitive and inclusive reporting provides an important basis for the imminent tasks to close existing gaps of reporting cases of corruption. This is why we look very much forward to today's interactive discussion with this highly distinguished panel. In March 2023, the BMZ published its new strategy for feminist development policy, a strategy that strongly advocates for equal participation of all people. In the strategy, women and marginalized groups build the center of the discussion. By strengthening the rights, resources, and representation of women and marginalized groups, feminist development policy contributes to eliminating discriminatory structures worldwide. The BMZ has also made anti-corruption and integrity a quality criteria of German development cooperation. The corresponding quality criteria strategy was published in 2022 and systematically integrates the fight against corruption and the promotion of integrity into all German development cooperation measures. By doing so, it does not only contribute to mitigating the harmful impacts of corruption, but more broadly, to promote sustainable development. For us at GIZ, these strategies guide our work in all aspects and build the principal policy frameworks for our projects. At last year's Conference of the State Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the first ever resolution on gender was adopted. This is a milestone in the 20-year-long history of the UNCAC. Although it fell short of some expectations, the resolution addressing the social impact of corruption takes account of the importance of addressing the gender dimension of corruption and creates a great opportunity to boost the mainstreaming of gender and in anti-corruption. It recognizes that corruption affects women and girls differently and disproportionately. Sexual corruption, also often called sextortion, describes the act of demanding sex or act of sexual nature within the context of the abuse of power. The resolution acknowledges sexual corruption as a form of corruption primarily perpetrated against women and girls, encourages states to raise awareness on this matter and to close legislative gaps of preventing and prosecuting such forms of corruption and sexual violence. The resolution forms a critical reference for civil society and is the basis to advocate for more inclusive and intersectional perspective. However, we wish also to address its shortcomings. First, it is important to recognize that not only women and girls, but also other marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by the impact of corruption. Second, barriers to reporting gender forms of corruption persist, and access to justice must improve for everyone. Third, marginalized groups are not only disproportionately affected by corruption, but also strong drivers of change and need continued support. We invite organizations from civil society, the private sector, academia, and the public sector to join our efforts to address its shortcomings and to translate our commitments into actions through collective action. It is also imperative to not only address the impacts of inequality and corruption, but to tackle their causes: unequal power structures and patriarchal and discriminatory social norms. This is how positive change and more equal and just societies worldwide can be sustainably achieved. With the Alliance for Integrity, a global multi-stakeholder initiative that promotes business integrity via collective action, we have developed a variety of products to support women and marginalized groups in business to prevent and fight corruption. Moving from a gender perspective to the broad perspective of diversity, we developed the practical guide to promoting business integrity with a gender equality, diversity, and inclusion perspective. The guide's principles are now anchored in our practical integrity trainings that the Alliance for Integrity offers, including to women-led, small, medium-sized enterprises. At the sector program Anti-Corruption and Integrity, we also currently are working on a study on gender transformative approaches to anti-corruption that build upon the feminist development policy. These approaches have the potential to reduce inequality and to limit the tolerance of corruption at the same time. The results of the study are planned to be included into the portfolio of the GIZ in the middle and long term. And we are looking forward to sharing the results with the anti-corruption community as soon as published. Now, without further ado, let me hand over to Monica, who will moderate the discussion. And as GIZ, as part of the German Development Corporation, we look very much forward to hearing the inputs and views of our esteemed panelists and the contribution also from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia. And you can rejoin the audience. So, formalities are over now. So we revert to our hopefully more friendly, inclusive format. This morning, we are very happy and privileged to have a panel and a variety of perspectives from civil society, the corporate sector, and government to share their insights, their experiences on barriers to reporting corruption for women, girls, youth, persons with disabilities. They also have some suggestions on how we can address those barriers, some policy proposals to make it easier for marginalized and vulnerable groups to report corruption. But we don't want to just listen to our panelists today, as I've said before. We want to hear your experiences too. We want to learn from you. And so we are trying to have a fishbowl format for those of you who have interacted or had experience of this type of event before. Unfortunately, we were unable to set up the room in that way, but we are going to make it happen somehow. So instead of a Q&A at some point, I will invite members of the audience to join the panel. Are you ready? I hope you are. So let me invite our distinguished panelists, starting with Kay. Dr. Ketakandria Rafitoson might be a familiar face to most of you. Yes, Kay is a pro-democracy activist, independent researcher, vice chair of Transparency International, executive director of TI Madagascar. But you're moving on, right? You'll tell us more about that. Yeah, she has a really long CV. I don't think I can say everything, but this is the important thing is you're passionate about social justice, democracy, and you're into social movements and changing the world. Welcome.
I believe in people power.
You believe in people power. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you, Monica.
And then we are also very happy to have on our panel Esma Gumberize, who is a disabled activist from Georgia. Welcome, Esma.
Thank you.
Esma is an ambassador of the European Democracy Youth Network, a global youth-led board member at the UNODC Grace Initiative, a member at Generation Democracy Network and at the 16th Element Youth Peace Initiative. She's a co-founder of the network of former youth delegates to the UN. She also has a very long CV.
Yeah. All of us do.
All of us do, right? So. But the important thing is that, Esma, you're really passionate about the rights of persons with disabilities. You're a pioneer in assistive technology use for persons with disabilities, and you're a champion for independent living for persons with disabilities. And you train people, police, medical people, people like us, on disability-related issues. You're an author. I can't say everything, but welcome, Esma. We are really pleased to have you on our panel.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening and being interested.
Okay, and then thirdly, Louise Portas from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. Louise is a crime prevention and criminal justice officer, also highly accomplished. She has a doctor in law and a PhD in anti-corruption. She's been with the UNODC as long as I've been with you for, since 2016. That's a nice coincidence. But you provide technical assistance to states parties to strengthen how they implement the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And most importantly, the reason why you're on our panel is that you specialize on issues relating to whistleblower protection. So thank you for coming. Yes. And then we also have Dr. Anna Maya Martens. Welcome, Anna Maya. She is at the German Institute on Compliance, but it has an acronym, DICO. What's that in German?
That's in German Institute on Compliance, Deutsches Institut für Compliance.
Okay.
It's not so far away from the English.
Yes, the acronym is not... It's because Deutschland.
Accessible.
I know, right? Yeah. Anyway, you were also managing director of Transparency International Germany. And director, anyway, people's CVs are so long. I would go on and on about her, but the important thing to know about her is that she is an innovator. Mm-hmm. And also you are passionate about creating safe environments in organizations. So we are looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, so the reason why we have some empty seats is that so you can come and join them at some point when I call you. But first, I'd like to challenge you as our audience before we launch into our discussion. Have you ever been asked to pay a bribe?
Oh.
How outraged were you? Did you pay it? You said no. Have you ever encountered an instance of corruption that outraged you so much that you wanted to report it? But have you ever reported it? Have you actually ever made a corruption report? Okay. I see 1 or 2 hands. Much less fewer hands went up than hands that went up for, oh yes, I paid a bribe or I wanted to report it, but only 1 or 2 people say they actually made a report. Who of you has been a whistleblower? Anyone? Okay, see, less and less hands. But let me ask you, how hard was it for you to make that report? What lengths did you have to go to actually make that report? I imagine it was quite time-consuming. I imagine the emotional cost took quite a toll on you. But now imagine that you were not as educated as you probably are, that you had no phone, no internet access, no money, lived miles away from the nearest urban center, lived miles away from any police station. And what if you had a disability? How would you make this report? So these are some of the things we want to think about today, because we know from the Global Corruption Barometer that women, young people, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups are disproportionately affected by corruption, that they spend more of their meager income on bribes than other parts of the population. But we also know from the Global Corruption Barometer data that women are much less likely to report corruption than men. And they also face severe challenges accessing justice. And we know that this is because of structural gender discrimination, the unequal division of domestic labor, the educational attainment gap, the digital access gap, the gender pay gap, and lots of gender gaps, and gender norms that make it hard for women to speak out. Because in many societies, women are brought up, to be quiet, to be submissive, and being part of femininity is not being an outspoken woman who causes and stirs up trouble. So in many countries, especially low-income ones, young people are looked down upon, they are not respected, and they might also face barriers to reporting corruption because of that. And when it comes to persons with disabilities and different types of disability, from hearing impairments to visual impairments, how about those living with albinism and other physical disabilities? I think we can all imagine that they face much greater challenges to report corruption. And yet they face a lot of it, because research by Transparency International and the Equal Rights Trust shows that corruption and discrimination often go hand in hand. While there are differences in the unique experiences of these various groups, we want to test that assumption here. Do they have the same experiences? Can the experiences of women, girls, and youth, are they the same? I think I've said enough, and the panelists have more to say. So our first question to the panel is, what barriers do different groups face in relation to reporting corruption? We would like to hear first from Esma. Could you tell us what sorts of barriers persons with disabilities face in reporting corruption?
Sure. Many barriers. Well, first that we already mentioned is accessibility of reporting mechanisms and how anonymized they are, and what if you rely on somebody's help to report, then it's very hard to remain anonymous. But then also that the services that we depend on largely are usually the ones that have a lot of potential for corruption, and that we would wish maybe to report on but are unable to, because it's a small community and we are may not be able to report on them. Also in terms of public perception, it's very important that public views usually that if you are disabled yourself, or you have a disabled family member, you are not vulnerable to corruption. Like you are not going to be engaged in corruption, because a lot of times disability community is both service providers and receivers are disabled, and it's pretty secluded and isolated community in most of the countries and most of the times. And this is why I actually speak not only about corruption of public servants here, formally public servants, but also, for example, of service providers, of NGOs that receive state funding or don't receive state funding, receive donor funding, or so on and so forth. So because of this, people think that we are over altruistic, that we would not be corrupt, and it's very hard to make even law enforcement officials to believe that sometimes disabled people can be as corrupt as everybody else. And due to this stigma, it's also hard to report, because disability community discourages its members from reporting, because there's so much expectations of us that we will not be corrupt, that once something is disclosed, then this is tied to our disability. And everybody speaks about, oh, how disabled people, how they are so opposed to one another, how they don't have any sense of solidarity. So it's just like with women, they are more blamed for things that everybody else would face less criticism for. This is another reason why these things don't get reported. And also because with state officials, again, so little money is being usually spent on disability, that state monitoring mechanisms don't prioritize monitoring them.
Thank you very much for that, Esma. I'm really struck by your comments on the fact that there are presumptions that people living with disabilities are altruistic and behave with integrity, and that therefore the organizations that represent you and through which you access services will not have corruption problems. I can imagine how much that of a challenge is. I wonder, though, whether there are any other barriers you face in terms of just actually accessing reporting mechanisms that you can tell us about, in terms of the fact that they are designed for people with no disabilities.
I mean, even just some of the websites cannot be accessible for screen readers. It's a very simple barrier. Also, a lot of times investigative bodies don't know that they can and how can they procure sign language interpretation, or how they can make services accessible for both the witnesses, the victims, and perpetrators. Or how should the text, like how should the, for example, blind people be questioned, and how should their testimonies be properly certified? Who should be reading the questioning protocols to them, for instance?
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you very much. I think that while some countries are, I'd imagine Europe is a bit ahead. I would hope so, because there is a directive, right? There's a directive, isn't there, at the EU level for all the organizations and institutions to be as disability friendly as possible. I imagine in low-income countries it would be much, much worse for these kinds of assistive technologies that enable people to interact with the world to be, accessible. But thank you for those insights, and I'll come back to you later. Next, I would like to turn to Anna Maya Mertens. So if we move slightly away from the world of persons with disabilities, and we imagine an organizational environment, and corruption does happen in institutional settings. But how easy is it for women and other groups in these kinds of environments, maybe persons with disabilities, to report corruption in organizational environments?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and also for the invitation, the ability to talk here, because I think it's very important. In most cases, it's not easy, and the most sort of ways to report, it's not really accessible. And the problem is who designed these systems, and if they are designed only by few and representing only sort of maybe male persons in age of 40 to 60, it represents their perspective. So you don't integrate perspectives coming from outside this very narrow sort of group of persons. And I think there are several barriers. There are the language is one barrier, the structures are one barrier, but the most important thing that we are working on at DICO at the moment is the sort of the culture. Do I have the feeling, the trust that it's not only sort of something that I could do, but I also something that I should do in the interest of the company. So we had this, as you mentioned, this new regulation implemented in this whistleblower protection law last year, 2nd of July, almost 1 year ago. And the first thing for the companies was sort of, they are now supposed to implement that in the companies. And what we are trying to do is to say, let's take it as a chance, because it's important the way you implement the law. It's not just to sort of, you can see that in the outcome if you are just trying to avoid or we are very sort of reactive to that, but trying to see what is meant by the law, what is the sort of the behind, what is the objective of this law. So it's not about to have the structures and the procedures is in place, but it's about encouraging the people to speak up. And also you mentioned that I'm innovator, thank you for that. I used to work as a consultancy, encouraging the companies for innovation. And this is exactly the same what we are doing when we talk about the whistleblower protection and the structures. You need to have the information from the very lowest level of the hierarchy of the company in order to see what could we do better. So it's in order, and I think it's a management perspective. You need to have this information to be stronger. And so there are so many things that we should do, and we are as DICO, that's more than 1,000 members, mostly companies, huge company, but also smaller and middle-sized companies that are committed to anti-corruption. What we are trying to do is a sort of a collective action to show the other companies this is not just possible, but it brings you further. So it makes you competitive, because of course we all know you need to have really good stuff. You need to have this diverse perspective also in order to create innovation and new ideas that are not there yet. So how to encourage that, and that's why we maybe TI Germany just last week, they released a new study on public administration taking care of the rights of youth and children, and asking how are the reporting mechanisms in these administrations. And the outcome was that there are so many different types of sort of implementing it, and everyone sort of, they are really at the moment really lousy because they are different, not accessible, not inclusive. But the main thing is there are no standards. So what we are trying to do at DICO is to create standards. We have our new since last week as well in English. What are the standards? What should be the standards for the companies when you implement this new law?
Okay, thank you, Anna-Maja. But maybe could you shed a bit of light on what those standards are? Give us like two, maybe like a baseline. What are two key things that a reporting mechanism in an institutional environment should have?
Yeah. Well, the first is maybe that you need to have a holistic approach. So it's not just important that those persons dealing with these reporting mechanisms know something about it, but the whole company should be aware. So and it should, as always, start tone from the top in the management. And it's important that it's called important. So it's really, and it's lived like sort of, this is very core thing what you need to do. And you need to integrate the staff give feedback. How does it work? And also, of course, guarantee that the security and anonymity, but you need to ask, do you feel protected? And of course, the question is also who asks. So you need to have this you need to have different persons so that they can identify with you, all these diverse persons.
Excellent, thank you. I think what I'm hearing from what Esma has shared and from what you've shared is that there are different types of barriers to reporting, but we can't just see them as like physical barriers, like the actual, are you going to call, are you going to write, are you going to fill in a form on the internet, are you going to talk to somebody? That's just one aspect of it, but then the other aspect of it is psychological. It's like, who are you going to talk to? Who are you? You know, the self-doubt that might come with it because of the culture, the environment, who is going to believe you? So there are also psychological barriers. And I wonder whether any of our other panelists have any comments. Louise, do you have anything to say about other barriers? Yeah.
It's on now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Monica. I just want to confirm what everybody has said so far, that this is actually confirmed in the research that UNODC is doing. So yes, in a gender perspective and inclusiveness, we have this publication that is called The Time Is Now, that was actually led by my colleague Jennifer, who is in the audience, so I'm sure she will be happy afterwards to talk more about this publication. But it's really interesting. It talks about like the gender dimension of corruption and the gender impact. And there are statistics that shows indeed that even when you have everything in place, like a reporting mechanism in place, or sort of culture of integrity in a given company, we still have statistics that show that, for instance, women or youth or other categories of people have tendency to report less than men in general, or even like employees, more regular employees, if I may say so. For the women perspective as well, we can see as well that when the women do report, they have the tendency to do it later. To like a woman would like wait a bit more or wait to be sure, or maybe being more afraid. We don't know exactly the reason, but that are the statistics. And the statistics also tend to show them that they are right, because at a given or equivalent level of report, the statistics also show that the women tends to have like stronger retaliation when retaliation occur. So again, I just want to put that into perspective. It's an average, it's statistics, and it doesn't give a causality link, but that shows that the law is not neutral. We try to put mechanisms that are neutral for everybody, but it's not. So yes, there are things to do to put some gender or inclusiveness elements in order to render those mechanisms equal.
Yes, of course, Kay. Thank you.
So, I just wanted to add maybe a common barrier to the special groups that we are studying here. I mean, women, youth, and people with disability. We are speaking about laws and procedures, but the first barrier is the knowledge or the lack of knowledge of such laws and such procedures. Before, being able to report, you have to know that there are reporting mechanisms and that you are legally entitled to report, because there is this sentimental feeling of, am I allowed to? Especially in patriarchal societies, especially for women, and also for young people in some societies where there are just the elderly or older people who are allowed to speak or to report on everything. So the victims of corruption will fear, crossing those barriers, age barriers, knowledge barriers, and this is really something striking, especially in developing countries. And one thing also, we already spoke a little bit about this, but we have to name it. It's a fear of social stigma. And this is something very important, especially with victims of sextortion and all related sexual violence is gender-based violence, because the victim has already, been suffering from the act itself, including sexual corruption, but they are fearing the judgment from the society, even from their own families. And most of the time, this social barrier, this fear of social stigma, is also very hard to overcome if we don't have, appropriate mechanisms and trained people to really take care of those. So this is just, what I wanted to highlight for now.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you to all our panelists. I think it's really sad is not the right word to use. It's just shameful on all our societies that the people who suffer most from corruption, the ones who face the brunt of it the most, are also the ones who face the most barriers to reporting it, and the ones who are least likely to report. And, we talk about leaving no one behind, but I don't think we are really doing enough to make sure that we all make progress. So I would like us now to discuss how we are addressing these barriers, because that's what the panel is about. We can't just throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, things are so bad. But I know that all of you are involved in various initiatives to try and see how to make corruption reporting more gender sensitive, more inclusive for persons with disabilities. So I would like to start with you, Louise, because United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, you're the lead technical assistance providers to states parties on how to improve this situation. Can you tell us some of the initiatives you have?
Thank you. Yes, indeed, we are providing technical assistance to countries to strengthen their whistleblower reporting and protection frameworks and mechanisms. So obviously, when we are talking about framework, we encourage states parties to include a gender element in the law. But I want to say this is not necessarily where this is the most important. It should be there. It's a principle. The law set up the scene. But everything happens when the workplaces, organizations, or different law enforcement authorities have to set up their own reporting and protection mechanism, the internal ones. For that, they have to develop policies and procedures that we call usually SOPs, standard operating procedures. And this is where it's important for those organisms to put a gender element at all stages. So basically, when you develop an SOP for establishing an internal reporting mechanism, you do exactly the same than the law. You do who can report, what can be reported, how can this report be made, and so on and so on. So I would just go very quickly through the different elements to explain concretely how you can include a gender touch on each one to render your reporting mechanism more inclusive and more gender sensitive. For instance, in the WHO, when you define your personal scope, we say it all the time, it's okay, whistleblower protection is limited to the insiders, but it should be the widest range possible of people working in a workplace or having access in a workplace or a relationship, professional relationship. So you should include all type of contract, whether permanent or temporary, interns, because therefore you will touch all category of workers that you will have in your organization. Regarding the material scope, we often say you can report abuse, corruption, harassment, discrimination, but it would be very important to add the gender element, saying discrimination based on gender or discrimination based on discriminating a specific category of workers, disabled or senior or youngs. The other one is the how you report. So we say, please establish reporting channels. But as I told, when you are disabled or when you are a bit vulnerable, it can be difficult to go to someone orally or to write or to call. So you have to offer the widest range possible of reporting interface to your people inside your organization. And if possible, if the technology allows for it, having like a reporting platform, an online platform that allows also for readers or for like specific thing you can have in your laptop to overcome some barriers in case, for example, you are disabled, or being able to report 24/7 because some people are more early morning and the other people can report more late at night depending their family situation or personal situation and so on. In terms also of the retaliation part, the protection part, you should always consider that discrimination, when someone is reporting either a wrongdoing or retaliation, a retaliatory act, a discrimination or an harassment based on gender or based on the discrimination of a specific group, many organizations have the tendency to consider this is a personal grievance or it's because you don't get along. This is not true. As soon as you have this reported, this should be considered as potentially a retaliatory act or a wrongdoing or both, depending the situation. This should be taken seriously. And one of the reasons why people or women, for example, do not report it, that they don't feel like they don't feel taken seriously. They will always say like, oh no, it's just because you don't get along, it's nothing. No, it's not nothing. You should have this kind of benevolence or presumption that something wrong is happening. And it could be a personal grievance. We don't want to prejudge here. We just want to say, welcome this complaint and do something to address it as soon as possible. In terms of retaliation as well, in the SOPs and in the law, we always try as well to tell countries, please do not have a closed list of what is considered a retaliatory act. Yes, a list is an indication, a dismissal, a transfer without consent. This is retaliation. But we have seen, depending the context of a country, social, cultural, economical, or a person, something can be considered as a promotion for someone and a retaliatory act for someone else. And this should be you should have a mechanism that allows for the person who received the complaint for retaliation to assess it and see and assess the case or the act in line with the personal situation, economical situation of the reporting person, of the whistleblower, to determine whether this is yes or not a retaliatory act. So a promotion could be a retaliation. We never, it's not because it looks like a promotion that it's actually one. So this is all the elements you can put in place throughout your reporting system and protection system to have like a gender and an inclusive sensitivity and to make people feel more welcomed and a bit trusting more the system, hopefully.
Thank you, Louise. I'm sure there's a publication somewhere, right?
We have several.
Okay. Okay, please let's look them up so that we can know those SOPs. Thank you so much, Louise. Now I'd like to turn to you, Esma, again, for how you think organizations and governments can do better to make it people for persons with disabilities to report corruption.
Right. So I just wanted to briefly comment also on what Louise has said about that retaliation might mean different things to different people, and the gravity of retaliation also might be different, and what the threat means. Because, for example, for a blind person who has to rely on the cited guides that are provided by only one organization, the threat of excluding that person from the union, from expelling from, for example, from the blind union in Georgian context, is a very grave threat, especially if that person lives alone, doesn't have a family. Many of these people don't know that these cited guidance service is funded by the municipal government. So even if they're not members of the union, of the nonprofit, they still are entitled to it. And even if they would know this, the union administration still would be able to find many reasons for them not to send to them this service, because it's scarce. And if the only way you get groceries is by this cited guide or by this personal assistant, then this threat of expulsion means more than just being expelled from the NGO. It means that you are gonna starve, that you are gonna have a lot of physical issues. And okay, how can the state promote reporting and promote exposure of corruption in disability sphere? And well, first of all, we have to have many reporting alternatives, and Louise has already mentioned that. So not only one, for example, not only one website, but also phone calls, but also in person, different possibilities that person can choose from. Train the law enforcement in communication standards, how to communicate with persons with disabilities, but also raise awareness that yes, disability can also be very, very vulnerable to corruption. For the state audit offices to prioritize disability monitoring, even if not so much money is being spent on it, and not because this little money may be influencing many, many people. And also, I would say in general, promoting persons with disabilities being involved in many other aspects of life, not only in disability inclusion, and empowering them to have access to more resources around. I want to bring my personal example that the only reason why I'm here speaking about corruption and disability and promoting this topic is because I was involved in the youth-led board of UNODC. So it's not because I'm involved in disability movement. So what I'm saying is that the only reason why I'm able to be so vocal is because my career, my income, my volunteer work is not fully dependent on disability community, which is tight in Georgia and it's tight everywhere. So more exposure, people should have more alternative ways of, I don't know, being promoted in terms of career, education, or any other possibilities. And as I said, like proper training.
Yes, thank you, Esma. And Louise, before you, I think that last point you made is really pertinent about being more inclusive overall of persons with disabilities and just making their involvement in society much more mainstream is in itself a protective mechanism for them, because it makes them less isolated, less dependent on these particular services for their lives. And as you said also, I think that the income issue is also very important for persons with disabilities. And I know that there are lots of initiatives for them to have jobs and to be more involved, but that's a really important point. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and just to add, the services also have to be demonopolized.
Yeah.
And donor community can actually play a huge role in asking for more transparency from organizations working on disability issues and being more welcome to whistleblower or internal reports from the beneficiaries of their donor support. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I wonder whether Anna, Maya, and Kay, you have anything to add also about having more gender-sensitive and inclusive reporting. You had already said something, Anna, Maya.
Yeah.
Do you want to add to your point, and then we'll turn to you, Kay?
Yeah, maybe just to add that I think it's important, and it was a bit like Esma said about the awareness building, because change is made by human beings and not by the systems.
Yeah.
And that's a problem also in companies, because they are now dealing with the implementation of the law, just checking whether or not they have fulfilled all the requirements. So I think this is an important topic, and of course tone from the top, but also to see who are the persons dealing with these reports. Are they well educated, and what kind of content and what kind of expertise they need. And I think this is something that companies need also from the outside world. So I think one of the huge obstacles, not only in in terms of anti-corruption and reporting, but the whole society, is that we are still in these very narrow silos, acting with our own groups. So I saw that we are now at DECO, we are integrating the tiny companies, the middle-sized and the huge companies, and they are so different. And the huge companies, they have every fancy systems and they can report everything, be very transparent. But the problems are the middle-sized or the tiny companies with very limited resources. So I think how to get the access to that and how to be able to learn from each other. And I think also what you mentioned with the studies, you have so many, you should just not read our studies, I read the studies from the business, but also your studies. So let's meet somewhere. So I think, and also with the last remark, and I just mentioned that in our previous talk, is to say that it's fantastic to be here, but I would also love to talk with men about the topics and to say that they need to allow and understand what is the added value if you integrate all the societal groups.
Excellent. I'm going to reserve one of the seats for a man.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to jump on that, if I may. Yes. Positive masculinity. That's a concept that we have to retain in, designing all of these mechanisms and everything, to overcome these barriers for reporting corruption for all categories of vulnerable people, but especially for women. We have to engage them because that's a notion of gender also. And in patriarchal societies, once again, where male roles are more prominent, we have to include those ones who are sensitive to the topic to be role models for the others, so that we are creating a positive snowball effect and change in such societies. And what I wanted to point out also in the design of the reporting mechanisms is to really try to empower people first. I already spoke about the legal literacy, if I can call it so, but also in terms of building the confidence among everybody, young people, women, people with disabilities, making them feel that they do matter, in our society. This is really, really important in terms of inclusiveness, but also just in terms of humanity. And the fight against discrimination is something ongoing, evolving, but this has to be a constant fight that all of us have to undertake each and every day in all sectors. And finally, I wanted to speak a little bit about the need for us to focus also on those social norms, because there are still limited research on, corruption, discrimination based on social norms. We are currently conducting a study in Madagascar about this, the effects of social norms on the access of women and girls to basic services, and this is part of a broader project named ISDA, Inclusive Service Delivery in Africa. So there are several chapters involved in that, thanks to the support of Global Affairs Canada. And the focus is really, through this study, to identify those social norms who are constituting another additional barrier to what we have mentioned. So as long as we don't have a comprehensive understanding of such social norms, the solutions that we may come up with can be biased or, missing a crucial piece, I would say. So I would like to encourage this, developing this scope of study while overcoming these difficulties. And encouraging the report of corruption, of course.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think we've had some rich discussions and mentioned many important points. And now I'd like to open it up to the audience. I have 2 seats. And I did say I would, Roberto, please come and join us. Anyone else to take the other seat? Well, think about it. And hopefully, if you're male, you're very welcome. Yes.
Thank you. Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me over. It's an honor, and thank you for the discussion. My name is Roberta Falvo, and I'm an anti-corruption associate expert at UNODC. And I work for the Global Resource for Anti-Corruption Education and Youth Empowerment, and I've had the honor to work with ESMA, which has been a really enriching experience, and I hope it was for all of you as well today. So in my work, or our work in anti-corruption in education, we have encountered a lot of sexual corruption, especially in spaces that are mostly frequented by young people, such as educational institutions. So my question is, what unique additional barriers to reporting sexual corruption exist for the different groups that you have been discussing about here today?
Yeah. Can
Okay,
I?
yes, of course, yeah.
So the additional barrier is, first of all, the feeling of shame, I would say, as I said beforehand, the victim has already suffered from the perpetrated act of sexual corruption, but she or he, because it can both be either men or women, they can fear, also the social stigma. But at the same time, they are afraid to report the sexual corruption act because they fear for, not only retaliation, but the consequences of such report on their future professional life if these are young people. We had the case in Madagascar where we investigated sextortion at the university, at Faculty of Medicine, for instance. The young trainees there are calculating the potential consequences. If I do report this, then I may not advance in my career. So, they are evaluating the pros and cons of such report. And then often they do choose, to keep silent, to remain silent about this, despite the huge consequences that these have on their emotional life, on their physical life and everything, because that will haunt them forever. That's a fact. So, cleaning those professional places, educational places from those toxic people in the various administration, may those be teachers, administrators, whatever, we have to be able to spot those toxic people and also to make into place safe grievance mechanisms, because that's the thing. And through our work, for instance, in Transparency International, we do provide these safe mechanisms. I'm taking advantage of my speaking time, to speak a little bit about the ALACs, which stands for the Advocacy and Legal Advice Centers. And we are running them in almost now 60 countries where there are TI chapters. We have, I would say, around 90 ALACs operational right now. And in the last 20 years, we have heard from 350,000 people reporting cases of corruption to those ALACs. We are providing for free legal counsel to those victims of corruption, but also we provide that empowerment leg. That is very important because we encourage them, to also teach their siblings, their relatives, their co-employees in the culture of reporting corruption. And at the same time, we are empowering them in knowing more about their rights. And it is really open to anyone. Women, men, elders, youth, people with disabilities, any kind of people. So we make it as a safe shelter for whistleblowers as well. And we are at the same time trying to teach the communities about how to blow the whistle safely, how to safely report corruption in avoiding, sometimes if someone is a victim of corruption, they may go uncovered on Facebook and saying, I've been, victim of this or that, and then the retaliation will come immediately. The social retaliation through judgments, but also if the act of corruption involves some public officials in sensitive countries, then they will come for you tomorrow and they will jail you. So also teaching people about those safe ways of reporting corruption. That's the point of the ALAX. So I'm sure that there are a lot of similar mechanisms, for reporting corruption around the world, but we have to add this gendered lens, also this inclusiveness lens. In the ALAX, we have this culture of proximity, especially for people with disabilities, because Esma said it's about, being able to go to the centers or not. And the ALAC teams, we have the mobile ALACs, we call them. They go to villages, they go to places, remote places where people cannot move from. So all of those components have to be considered when addressing, those barriers.
Yeah, that's really excellent that you mentioned the ALACs, Kay, because for those of us who work a lot on sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, if you look at not the Global Corruption Barometer, what's the other? Afrobarometer. And you look at what the data shows on the level of trust in government institutions, it's very, very low. And police are the least trusted institution.
There's a reason for that.
There's a reason for that, right? So since government institutions are not trusted, I think it's also hard for victims of corruption to report to the police that they trust the least. And especially if they are women, a lot of these institutions are still male-dominated.
Exactly.
And not just the police, but across the whole of government. There's still a high level of male domination. And also, you talked about, Roberta, about educational environments. And some of the people who suffer, for instance, sexual corruption are girls. They're not even women yet. I imagine it's more difficult for someone who has not yet attained adulthood to make a report. And even when they do, what's likely to happen is that they have to tell their story again and again and again for something to be. And I've done this at U4 Anti-Corruption Resource Center. We get people who write to us with reports of corruption, but they don't know that we don't deal with corruption reports. And then we have to tell them, sorry, we don't deal with corruption reports. We are a think tank. We can't help you. We get all sorts of emails coming to us, and then we say, try the Transparency International chapter. But Transparency International is in a lot of countries, but not every country.
Exactly.
And advocacy and legal advice centers, how many do you have now?
90.
90, that's quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, but we wish, it's continuously developing depending on the means that we have.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that what is special with sextortion is that in most countries, it's not yet considered as a crime. So, it is something considered between a rape, maybe a consent from the victim somewhere, harassment, sexual harassment, or whatever. So it is a blurred notion for many countries. And then when victims of corruption, of sexual corruption, are seeking for some help, they are also considering this. Will I be trusted if I explain that? Because the concept of sexual corruption relays on the main definition of corruption. It's the abuse of power for, personal gains or undue influence or anything. And here you have to have someone with authority, and then someone from whom the favor is extorted through, it's a sexual acquaintance or a sexual act which is used as a bribe. And it's the body of the person who is sold through that, but it is extorted. So there is abuse of power out there. But we need to have legal reforms for that to be recognized fully. And this, I would say, is something to be considered as well on the global level, not just through our grievance mechanisms. There has to be a change on the global level, recognizing sextortion really as a crime against humanity. All kinds of human beings can be victims of sextortion. So you see,
that's radical. That's radical. Sexual corruption as a crime against humanity. But maybe it's apt. Maybe that's what we need for people to start taking it more seriously. And also, I wonder whether people in the audience have more to say about this, because I imagine when it comes to something like sexual corruption, it's very, very difficult to speak about. I don't imagine that that's a type of corruption you would put in a written report, you know, or phone someone to talk about. Maybe you'd rather talk to someone face to face that you can trust. But does anyone have any experience? Someone else would like to come and join us? Yeah, sure. Come to the front. Where's the microphone? Okay.
Yeah. You have.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Is it working? Is it?
Yes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join this power panel. I hope you're taking pictures. Thanks, Dr.
Somebody,
Monica.
please.
It's a very interactive panel, and we've enjoyed it, and that's why I'm compelled to also share. Yeah, thank you. Please share them. My name is Sheila Masinde. I'm from Transparency International, Kenya. I've learned so much from this panel. I just thought that I could also share some experiences we have in regard to reporting in Kenya, because we also conduct what we call the Bravery Index. We try to learn a lot also through research. And what it's been telling us for a number of years is that, of course, women are always at the front line in terms of women and young people are at the front line in terms of seeking services on behalf of their families, whether it's in the education sector. You know, small children have to be taken to school. They have to follow up with the education authorities and so on. Then there are hospital visits. Most of the time it's women who would be taking an elderly family member or a child or accompanying their spouses or so on. Water, you know, it's women who would be seeking this kind of services. And so they are the front line in terms of service, seeking access to services. And that means they also be the ones who will face the bribery demands. But unfortunately, because we also run the advocacy and legal advice centers, as Kay has actually just described them, is we find there are fewer women who come to report. In fact, we have various mechanisms through which we encourage people to report, not just by walking in, because sometimes people are in far-off places, but we give them like toll-free lines, SMSs. But you'll find it's mostly men. Even if it's a woman who's faced a corruption incident, it will be their husband or a brother or a son or a grandson. My son is the one who operates my phone most of the time, so this is not unique to people living in upcountry places. It's just common that you find it our male relatives who have access to our phones and so on. So you find that they're not the ones who come to report. But then there's also seems to be this culture that we also just don't like to report wrong behavior. But then even for women are maybe particularly more sensitive, you know, fear of reprisal. Maybe I'll not be able to access that service in future. And maybe that's something perhaps we need to address, that aspect around fear. And even how do I know many of us are working on whistleblower protection mechanisms in regard to legislation and policies and institutions which support the whistleblower protection. But maybe perhaps, I know in our case I was just listening to the panel and I realized we don't really look at, you know, gender sensitivity or even disability inclusion as we think about, you know, whistleblower protection. So we just think that one size will fit all. But what would we need to do to protect, say, women whistleblowers or young whistleblowers or whistleblowers living with disability? So maybe those are some of the things that we need to think about. On reporting, I think from my experiences running the ALACs, what we found is that sometimes it's also useful to have someone that a woman can relate to. Like if I walk into an ALAC to report a case, I mean, if I meet a man, maybe I might feel a bit, you know, apprehensive about making that report, especially if it also includes issues around, you know, sexual exploitation. So what are some of those considerations we have to make our places where we are reporting corruption safe for women and give them that assurance that when you report, you know, there will be someone who will be available, who will be able to, you know, relate to you at your level. So I think those are some of the sensitivities perhaps we need to think about. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you, Sheila. Okay, go on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sheila. Very meaningful. And to add on that, on the spaces or places where we have those grievance mechanisms and centers, one thing that we have used in Madagascar, and maybe it's worth sharing, is that you have to locate the ALACs near hospitals or places where women usually go, and that they don't have to justify to their husband or relatives or whatever, like, I'm going to the ALAC. No, they don't have to say it. They just go to the hospital or the healthcare center, and then they will find, those friendly people who can help. That's very important. And also, there is a huge need to train the caregivers, I will say, to this philosophy of corruption reporting, because nurses or doctors, they have the technical competence, to heal people, but they can also, in addition to that, be this listening ear where people can, victims of corruption may sometimes, speak to, or they might identify the signs of sexual abuse and corruption, and then help the victim report. So we have to sensitize them, to train them to that as well. So there's a need for doing this. And in some, I don't know for other African countries, but in Madagascar we don't have enough psychologists. Maybe we have 100 for a whole country of 28 million people. So you can imagine the huge gap. There should be psychologists in these centers able to really deal with the victims, comfort them, and also try to soothe all the fears and anticipating also the social stigma that they are fearing. So a lot of things to build still. Yeah.
Very important points. Thank you. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Roberta. Anyone else? How am I going to do this? We still have a lot of time, so I'm going to start with Jennifer, then the lady in the middle, and then you last. You can come and take seats. You can come and take a seat, and then after that, you can take after when Jennifer has spoken. Yeah, Jennifer, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jennifer Sorry-Bradford. I'm working with Louise at UNODC. I'm also leading our global work on the gender dimensions of corruption. I wanted to emphasize something, to not really want to take it away from the sexual corruption aspect.
Yeah, sure.
I can come back to that. But just to mention, I think it was Esma who mentioned the necessity to have alternatives to report.
Yeah.
Because I think it's not just a question of a woman or a man, but it's also, if the person you're supposed to be reporting is the person you are supposed to report to, you're stuck.
Yeah.
And I'll give an example. Somebody I know who was sexually harassed by her supervisor. So she went to her supervisor's supervisor, also a man, who then sort of joined in on the sexual harassment, realized that she was prey. She took it to the next level, happened to be a woman. And the woman said, "Are you sure you want to go ahead with this? Because think of the social stigma. Yeah. You will be known forevermore as." So, I mean, the woman went through with it, right? And the two men have since been sacked. But I think, these are the things we need to really have in mind. You don't know, it's a bit of a minefield when you go into reporting, especially if we're talking about whistleblower reporting, which is within your own organization. Because there are connections within the organization you're not necessarily aware of. So having, and I think it was actually Germany who had some form of an external party whom you could report corruption to and so on. We have to be innovative. We have to be a bit more creative so that we can allow an opening where you think that there is none. You have to have safe passage. When it comes to sexual corruption, very briefly, just to say, from the UN Convention Against Corruption perspective, when we look at what is considered an undue advantage, which most definitely, I think, any public official would never have an advantage in their contract to say that I can sexually harass somebody or request sexual favors. Sex is actually considered as one of the elements when we do the implementation review mechanism. And there are relatively few countries that say that they cannot take that into consideration as a form of corruption. But the proof is in the pudding. Is it actually implemented? Because you can have beautiful laws and you can say everything is fine and yes, we can do that. But the question is then, are you actually doing it? So I want to highlight that sometimes it's not even the law that is lacking, it's the implementation. Because I think a lot of people do not associate sexual corruption as corruption. Yeah. And if you don't realize that it is a form of corruption, why would you then go ahead and try to report it or implement it as such? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen.
Yes, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you so much. And like our colleague said, exciting to be here if anyone wants to take pictures. This is such a treat to be here this morning with all of you. My name is Maria Concepcion. I'm a former country director in the Caribbean. I used to manage disasters for several years. I'm no longer managing that. I welcomed the comment on psychologists. I'm working currently with an international group of psychologists who are drafting a policy on their response to disasters, emergencies, both human-made and disaster-made. And I've been tasked with drafting the policy, and I just wanted to share my perspective. And I said, okay, I'll draft the policy, but I can't draft this policy without knowing that there's going to be funding available for all the psychologists throughout the world, in your country, in your member states, who are going to receive the continuous training in order to respond to the compounding effects of weather and human-made disasters. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not like I'm going to go into the Caribbean today and manage the aftermath of a tropical storm. I'm going to manage the aftermath of a tropical storm in an environment where we have an increase of gender-based violence, where we have an increase of trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of you mentioned before the leaning ears.
Yeah.
We have a lot of leaning ears who want to help, but if we don't create a mechanism where there's continuous training and funding for that, it's really very difficult. And then secondly, afterwards, I just want to be able to rely on all of you to try and grab your materials, your reading materials, so I can add to the reference list.
Okay.
Right? So I can add to the literature review that we're creating. But again, you know, we have the best intentions, but without training, without funding, without continuous support, you know, before a psychologist can walk to the front lines, you know, we have to think about self-care and managing our own families. So I just wanted us to think about what some of the solutions can be for that. Thank you.
That's excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very great that you joined us. Yeah, we still
thank
have
you.
some time, so there was a hand up. You can come and take a seat. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, we still have some time. So,
Two seats.
and it's good that there's a bit of competition for seats. I can rejoin the audience. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yep. Thanks so much. So my name's Alison Matthews, and I work at Transparency International in our Global Secretariat on the ALACs, the Advocacy and Legal Advice Centres. And I guess my question for the panel and sort of general reflections is around kind of some themes that we're seeing coming through out here, how the necessity around partnerships to be able to actually tackle some of these issues that we're seeing in terms of identifying barriers, identifying solutions to overcome barriers, identifying additional services that could be provided beyond, well, from the Transparency International perspective, providing support on corruption-related cases that the victims and witnesses are reporting to us. So I think it was more just around the sorts of things that we're looking at, which is kind of how you can potentially look at partnering with organisations on the ground. I mean, so we have a project called Inclusive Service Delivery in Africa, which includes 5 sub-Saharan African countries, and a big focus of that is around saying how is it the TI chapters are partnering collaboratively with different bodies. I have to say, Esma, your comments are taken, noted, but also individuals as well that have the lived experiences of the groups that we're trying to reach, because depending on the research that's been undertaken in each of the countries, there are certain target groups that the chapters are trying to reach to who we've seen are more prone to experiencing corruption or being vulnerable to discrimination and corruption that comes along with that. So I think it's quite interesting to say how is it that you could partner together to sensitise the other organisations so that they can recognise corruption, potentially refer cases to the ALACs, for example. Also to inform our chapters on how we can make our reporting mechanisms more accessible, inclusive, from the physical side, from the psychological side, from the other elements that need to be taken into account that we've talked about today. And also what sort of services which are needed beyond just the legal advice and support around what safe reporting platforms and support to be able to take this forward, particularly in the context of sexual corruption cases that we have seen coming to the ALACs, although it's severely underreported based on our research showing how prominent the problem is, how widespread the problem is, particularly in the health and education sectors that it focuses on. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out to the panel to see if there are any sort of general reflections on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I allow the panel to respond,
Me?
Thank
Okay,
you.
good.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Joanna Neublat. I'm a journalist. I work for TI Brazil. I'm also mother to 2 autistic children and sister to a woman with Down syndrome. And I wanted to add to what Sheila brought, that most of us women will be carers of small children, of elderly, and people with disability, family members with disability, in a way that men won't be. And maybe women will be afraid to report corruption because they can be cut off of important services. And maybe there is a cultural question for women to report. But I think many women will not have the time to do that because it may not be as simple as sending an email. She may have to put some work to do that. And in addition to her paid work, she has many hours of unpaid work, as men don't have. So I would just add this perspective that we have to think about easy ways to report and effective ways to report.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's why it's so important that Kay mentioned you have mobile clinics that find people where they are. I don't know whether TI in your chapter has an ALAC. We don't. You don't, okay. Well, but thank you for bringing that perspective. That's very important. And thank you to Alison for your point about cross partnerships and collaboration with other organizations that represent other groups to make, to take this further so that it's not just dependent on the TI chapter, but that everyone else is involved in this initiative. I think we've had a very rich discussion. I don't know whether any of the other panelists, you have something burning that you would like to add. I'll give 1 minute to each panelist. Louise, anything?
In 1 minute? No, I think many things have been said and way above my knowledge about the topic, but just coming back to the pure whistleblower protection reporting and mechanism, I just wanted to highlight also something like, yes, to be inclusive, you put all these gender elements that I mentioned, but something I think is very important also is the communication. Trying to remove the barrier and the bias from the very beginning, trying to be as inclusive, transparent, and welcoming for communication from the beginning within the company or the organization that wants to set up a culture of speak up and want to set up a robust internal reporting and protection mechanism. It starts with that. And it starts also with the way you draft the policy. And sometimes you see some policies for whistleblower protection or anti-retaliation policy that, okay, if you read it through it, you have all the elements, but the way it's drafted, it's kind of reluctant and sometimes a bit rude. And depending your sensitivity, you read that and you feel like, nah, no, thank you very much. So, I mean, like some people may wish to report or may have reported just because the language of the policy you read is deterrent, or depending your situation or how you're afraid or how vulnerable you feel, you not always are vulnerable, but you feel, you may wish not feel like you're reporting because you feel like the burden of the process. So yes, it's a process. Yes, there are any element, and people who said there have been whistleblowers, I think they can testify that this is not an easy path, but we have to make it as easy and welcoming as possible. And this is also that, being gender sensitive and inclusive.
Excellent, thank you. That's a very important point. Whistleblowing policies can be so dry and impersonal the way they are written, but bordering on rude is taking it a bit far. I think that's important. Anna Maya, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I would have one wish, if I may.
Yes.
Because I think it's fantastic to do this political ask jointly, but let's do the implementation together as well. Because I think we can, certainly from the company side, we need your experience, your insights, your perspective. But it could be that you need ours as well. Because it's a practical sort of, and we have the companies that are really committed to and willing to do it properly. So we have this certain, and if we manage to do this and to send the message to the other companies, you manage to do this, and it's your own profit that sort of, that gets stronger. Then you can change the world even a bit more.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, anything, any last words?
Yeah. A lot has been said, and I may say that I have to say I've been very inspired by all the, ideas and tools and policies and, perspective that all of you have shared. But what I would like to engage us, all of us in the room and beyond, is to really continue to build together an environment where people are aware of their rights and where people are not afraid to stand for those rights when the time comes, if it has to come. Ideally, let's avoid corruption by all means. But if, unfortunately, someone faces it in all kinds of forms, especially sexual corruption, let's make sure that that person will find the right ways for reporting it, and also will find the right support to face it. So we all have the duty now. I hope that you learned something from that session today. Now it is your duty to spread the word and to continue to build in this safe environment for all of us. So that's my main message. And yes, keep up fighting against corruption. That's our task, and that's why we're here all together. So thank you.
Thank you, Kay. And Esma, I'd like you to say the last thing to our audience. And the most important, that's why, yeah.
I think we are so used to working in silos. Like we were discussing that we didn't see any organizations of persons with disabilities attending the conference, at least at the participant list, at the speakers lists. And this says a lot about the issue. And I just want to say there were a few cases when we had an issue with explaining to investigative journalists that corruption happens in disability, where we had a situation where one of our Georgia's allied countries' high-level anti-corruption official visited the country and met with a lot of civil society representatives from wide circles, an array of work, everyone but the organizations that work on disability. So my, let's say, final word would be, do not forget disability in anti-corruption work.
Thank you. I think that's the best note on which to end. And I hope the organizers of the IACC are listening. I look forward to seeing a change at the next IACC. Thank you all. Thank you very much, panelists. And thank you to our audience.